RunBuzz, episode 132. In this episode of the RunBuzz podcast, I speak with Shawn Musgrove. She's one of our Pace Builders coaches, and she is going to share her top cold weather running tips with everybody so that you can stay comfortable, stay warm out on your runs this winter. All this and more coming up on today's podcast. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the RunBuzz podcast. I'm glad to be with you. And tonight I am joined with Shawn Musgrove. Shawn's one of our Pace Builders coaches, one of our newest coaches actually. She's been with us a couple months, but first time on a podcast. And we're going to jump right in it. We're going to discuss a little bit of her background, how she got into running, and then she's going to share her top cold weather running tips with you so that we can keep warm this winter. We don't always have to take running indoors when it gets cold out. We'll talk about how you can be safe and how you can dress and all the different things that you need to consider when running through the cold weather. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Hi, Shawn. Welcome to the RunBuzz podcast.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing great. So I gave a brief introduction of who you are and why we're coming on the show. So why don't we take a couple minutes for those that don't know you and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Philadelphia, but then I moved to Delaware as an adult, and I have two children. And so after I had my children, I had gained a whole bunch of weight, and so I decided I would get healthy. I started going to the gym, and I tried a couch to 5K program.
And just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Philadelphia, but then I moved to Delaware as an adult, and I have two children. And so after I had my children, I had gained a whole bunch of weight, and so I decided I would get healthy. I started going to the gym, and I tried a couch to 5K program and totally bombed it. And so then I kept exercising for a while until my daughter was doing the Girls on the Run program with her school, and she wanted me to run a 5K with her. So by that time, I had gotten fit enough that I think I could probably do this. So my goal was to run a 5K. We did not run the Girls on the Run 5K that day, but we ran another one. And just run without stopping was my goal. And once I did that, I caught the bug, and I just thought, now that I've done this, I have to keep trying and doing more things. So I ran a whole bunch of 5Ks that summer, and then found a great running buddy, and she encouraged me to start running a half marathon, and I thought that was totally crazy. Totally crazy. I was never going to be able to do that. And we worked on it, and we did it. So she just kept making these crazy goals that I never thought we would accomplish. But once she made the goal, I don't think she realized that once she didn't let her turn us down. We didn't stop. So I just kept trying different things, and I recently finished a marathon, which was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I really love helping people learn how to become a runner. When so many people want to be runners and think, I'll never be able to do this. And so last summer, I helped a running group of women learn to run. And it's just caught me. I'm a teacher by trade, and so I guess that's just my nature. I like to help them learn how to do it. So we ran a 5K group for the summer, and then I thought, well, maybe I could do this a little bit more. So I got my running coaching certification through the RRCA.
You said your daughter is running with Girls on the Run. Tell me a little bit about what that Girls on the Run is.
Girls on the Run is an organization. I think it's throughout the country, maybe throughout the world. It's mainly elementary and middle school girls, and it's more of a girl empowering kind of thing where They do lots of team building, and anybody can join. And even if you don't run, you can come and run as much as you can and just learn about being a stronger girl, woman. And then at the end, they culminate it with a 5K. In Delaware, where I live, it's a small area. So it's like half the state meets and does a big 5K with all the schools that have done it in the area. So it's probably 1,000 girls.
Wow. We actually have that around here, and someone that I run with or used to run with, she volunteers and leads a group of girls as well. So we have another very similar group, and it kind of came out of that, and here in Columbus, and it does the same thing, but with boys, and teaches them kind of the teamwork and respect and respecting others, and it kind of built, I think, along the same concept. So interesting. An interesting way to approach, because it's like we think of a lot of younger kids having kind of the cross country, some of the, whether it's through the schools or whether it's through community organizations, cross country. And we're also seeing now that go into other recreational type club activities. So interesting. So I wanted to clarify that for anyone who might not be familiar, because if you have, younger girls and look around, there's opportunities for like them to join in a lot of areas. Because I do believe it is. I know we have it here in Columbus, Ohio. So if we have it here, we have it in Delaware, I'm pretty sure it's another in other cities as well. So what was it that attracted you to running? My understanding is, or at least what it sounded like, you weren't a runner growing up. This is more of an adult onset hobby. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. I did sports growing up, and I hated the running piece. I'd like to run on the field, but after that, I did not want to run around the field. And so I think the thing that attracted me to it was that, I could do this. And I never thought I could. I never thought I would be a runner. I told people I was not meant to be a runner.
We hear that a lot.
I never thought I would be a runner. I told people I was not meant to be a runner.
We hear that a lot. I think it's our way of justifying ourselves that we're just not prepared, or we haven't prepared enough. We haven't got in shape enough that we really feel good at it. And so I think we automatically, our minds take us to that place of, well, I'm not a runner. And, I'm doing that kind of with the case study that you're aware of as well with Carrie, the case study interview with her in the last episode. And that was a very similar thing that comes up over and over again, this theme that, well, I'm just starting out running. I don't feel like a runner, so therefore I'm not a runner. It's like, it's weird that we self-identify with a hobby. I don't know. It just seems kind of interesting how that comes up over and over again with people brand new. And I think it comes mostly from adults getting back into a sport. It's almost like we're trying to self-sabotage ourselves before we even get into it. And so I think that's an interesting thing. When you said you work with a lot of newer runners and you created a group to kind of help people become runners, it's really good to know that you also come from that same place, because you can relate to them better. Like I relate to the runners I coach, because a lot of them were just like me. And I wasn't a great runner. I wasn't even a runner in school. And I think that is an interesting way to come from a coaching perspective, is that you don't have to be the Olympic athlete to be a good coach. You have to be somebody that's empathetic and comes alongside the people you coach. And I think that's important when you were leading those 5K groups, is that you're right there with them, going through it with them, and you're just a guide, right? You ran the marathon. You said that was the hardest thing. What marathon was that?
I ran the Via Marathon. It's in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So you would think that Allentown, Pennsylvania, if you know it, is very hilly, but this was a continuous downhill marathon. So I trained on the very little bit of hills we have here in Delaware, up and over bridges and things like that. So I had some feel for it, but I don't think my body was ready for the downhill part of it.
Yeah. So anyways, thanks for sharing that background a little bit. And I want to start transitioning into tonight's topic. And so you've put together some tips around running in the cold weather. So it's getting to be that time of year where we have to start thinking, at least most of us, unless we live in warmer climates, but for most of us, we are reaching that point where it's getting cold out. It's getting dark. It's may not be that as exciting weather that we had in the early fall when things were cool, but not necessarily cold. So why don't you jump in right away and give us that first tip?
So what we're talking about is the cold weather running. And so I have several tips to give you about that. The first tip is to wear layers. So the guide that I use, I love Pinterest, and I found this little guide. It's a little picture on Pinterest that says, from this degree to this degree, wear these types of clothes. And it goes for all the way down to 0 degrees up to 100 degrees. So when I have a question, I just look at that because I often think, oh, I'm freezing, so I need to dress really warm. And then you get out there and you're very warm because you've dressed warmer than you really need to. So I think the guide is like, dress like it's 20 degrees warmer than it actually is. So you can wear layers. I guess you can't really layer your pants, but you can wear two different, I sometimes wear 2 tops, like a short sleeve top and then a long sleeve top. Sometimes when it's really cold, I wear 3 and a vest over top of that. And you can wear either a hat, or I wear a head wrap that I can tuck in my waistband. If I get too hot, I can take it off and tuck it in my waistband. Another good thing to do is if you're running in a race when it's cold, you can get things that you can throw away, such as like a sweatshirt from your Goodwill pile and dollar store gloves and hats. So you don't mind dropping them on the ground and leaving them because they didn't cost you too much, or you were going to get rid of them anyway. Most races, if you run in the cold and discard your clothing, they come along and pick them up and donate all the things that they pick up along the route to a Goodwill or a thrift store of some kind.
I've seen that with a lot with races. And just a funny story, when I started running in the wintertime, and it was really cold, and I used to run around a parking lot at the local school because it had lights, and I really didn't want people to see me. And I was also taking my dog, who was a puppy at the time, and I'd let him kind of run around the parking lot, and I would just run over and over again. And I remember it being so cold and not knowing any better, I actually wore ski pants. And I had the toastiest, I mean, it was cold. I was running and it was in the 20s, but I needed to get that run in. And so I went out and I was wearing ski pants, which I do not recommend you run if you're going to be out running anything longer than what I was. But I was only running, a mile or 2. And most of the time it was walking between my house and the school. So, but I ran in ski pants and it was totally cool. I mean, people probably thought I was weird, but I was warm. I do think with the 20 degrees is a good guide. I think if you can send me that graphic, I'll put it in the show notes page for this page, or at least link to it on Pinterest is what I probably should do. And I've noticed with some of when it's that not necessarily freezing cold, but in that kind of that 30s, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, where a light jacket is enough to keep you warm, is that getting one like the runner's jackets that are vented, I found helps let the sweat and the moisture escape and let you vent the moisture without it accumulating inside the jacket. And so I found that those running jackets have been very useful to let all the sweat out. What about face? Like my face, when I went out and run, there's 2 areas that bother me. One is my thighs. It seems like for whatever reason, my thighs get frostbite. And then the other part that gets frostbite is my face. So any tips of things that you can think of there?
They do make like ski masks that are almost a neoprene type material that you can wear, and they have like some of them have just the opening for your like main face area, your nose and your eyes. and it covers your mouth. And then other ones have just this little nose piece that is open, that I've seen a lot of people wear. I don't particularly like having something that much over my face, so I don't wear them that often, but I have seen people wear them. The other thing that I wear is I have a couple pieces of Under Armour, and it has like almost a fleece on the inside, but it's moisture wicking at the same time. So it's warmer, but it's also, it doesn't like get soaking, drenching wet.
Yeah. I noticed the first couple weeks when I start running in the cold, I have lots of problem with my chest hurting, the cold air in your lungs. And I found that getting out, and the more you acclimate yourself to the cold weather, eventually that goes away after a few days. But a lot of people will go out that first run or two, they don't like how their lungs hurt, and they just quit. And I think if they stick with it a couple more days, acclimate, definitely make sure they're dressed properly, I think that most people can really learn to enjoy running in the cold. Unless it's super, super cold or super, super windy, I would prefer running in the cold 100 times over running in the heat. The older I get, the less heat tolerant I get. I just get kind of grumpy and just not enjoy the heat. Whereas the cold, I feel like I can always layer up.
The other thing that I have seen research on is that running in the cold, not cold, but like 50 degrees is the best racing thing to run in the cold.
No, not at all. I'm just curious, what would you say your personal cold tolerance is? What's the lowest you would go before you'd say, it's time to come indoors?
I think probably the teens would be pretty cold. I ran a half marathon last December, and it was about 25 degrees. And that was pretty chilly, but once I got moving, I was fine. But I have a little more of a fat layer than some. And so I think that helped me, because my running partner had a really hard time running when it was that cold. And she's much leaner than I am.
I've run as low as right around 0 Fahrenheit. If there's no wind, I'll go as low as about 10, low teens, 10. As soon as the wind kicks in, or the wind chill kicks in, then that number goes up. But anything 20s, 25s, and above Fahrenheit, I will typically run. I prefer 40s, 50s, obviously, but if it need, I will go run in the cold before I'll run on a treadmill, if I can help it. And
absolutely,
obviously, that's going to lead us into the next point. So we talked about layers, being able to shed layers if needed be. What's the next tip you have?
The next tip is that typically in the winter it gets dark. It stays dark longer and gets dark earlier. So a lot of times you might need to run in the dusk or in the dark if you're going to do it before or after working hours. So running with safety gear, making sure that you wear a reflective vest. They make all kinds of reflective vests. They make, like, often do it before or after working hours. So running with safety gear, making sure that you wear a reflective vest. They make all kinds of reflective vests. They make like a full vest. They make just the reflective banner that you can wear. They make lights that you can put on your clothing or your belt, like clip on your belt, your waist belt. I've seen several people wearing the Knox gear, and I think that you have a link to their website and a review of their website on your RunBuzz page. And so I'm looking to get myself some of that this year. I usually run in the dark in my personal neighborhood, so there's not a whole lot of cars, but it's really good to be safe.
Yeah, just to add on to the lights, one of the things I didn't realize until I started looking into, there's actually a science behind lighting and what is considered visible to, let's say, drivers. And that's one of the reasons why I bought the Knox gear. Now, I run in the neighborhood where it's safe too, so I have a lot of street lights, a lot of housing, just houses putting on the kind of the floodlights on their garages and stuff. So I have a pretty safe place to run anyways without wearing the Knox gear. because I can see cars coming a long ways away. I can jump up onto the sidewalk and I'm fairly safe that way. The interesting thing about the lights is I used to just run with a headlamp and maybe some reflective gear. And I don't know if you've noticed, if you've ever driven down the road, there's so many white lights like a headlamp that it's just designed to light up a trail. It's not necessarily designed to make you that much more visible. You're actually better off with reflective gear that moves as headlights hit it. However, at certain angles, for example, if you're running on a sidewalk and you're running parallel to the street and you're on the sidewalk and cars are coming from behind you and you're running, you have the right of way, so you run across the street and a car is turning right. I didn't realize they actually are unlikely to see you or less likely to see you because the angle, the headlights aren't shining on you until it's too late. And the more I dug into why are these lighted vests becoming more and more popular, and that's because the colors they're using, and they attach to you from all different sides, right? They can see you from the back, the sides, the angles, and the different colors they're using because they've been shown to be more visible than your standard white headlamp. Or a lot of times the flashing lights, if you put a flashing light on the back, that certainly helps. But the interesting test was just drive down your road, like a road that's got a lot of houses off the side of it. And there's just so many porch lights and different lights from houses and stuff that just pop into your peripheral vision that if you're not paying attention, like a runner headlamp just kind of blends in with it. Unless it's shining you obviously right directly in the eye. But I've had so many close calls with runners that it's crazy. They're running 5 o'clock in the morning on a major road that I leave to go to work, and they're wearing black. It's like, why are you wearing black? And some of them aren't even running. It's like there's, I'm surprised they haven't been killed. And it's just one of those things where drivers, there's enough distraction as it is, let alone not having enough reflective gear, enough lights. So that's why I like the Nox gear. It's super light. It's not the cheapest. It's $40, $50 for a lighted vest, but I think that's a pretty cheap price to pay for your safety. And the battery life on them's great. They're super lightweight. They weigh less than like a pound, and it uses LED lighting and just different colors. And it just to me, I just like, everybody raves over it. And I resisted using them for so long, but I use the Nox gear to light myself up. And then I use these little knuckle lamps, and I can hold them in my hand. And as I'm running, I can point the direction that I want them to point at, and they're rechargeable. So I like the knuckle lights as well. But those combination of the two, one provides lighting so I can see, and then the Nox gear provides the lighting so somebody can see me. And, in case I slip and fall and break a hip or something, even though I run in a safe neighborhood, somebody will eventually see a flashing Christmas tree laying on the, you look like a Christmas tree. But yeah, so obviously lighting's important. What else you got?
Well, I just wanted to say one thing about the reflective gear. You make a very good point because the other day I was driving down the road in the dark in the evening, and I saw what I wasn't sure what it was at first because my headlights grabbed it but then lost it. And it was a person running with a safety vest on, but I didn't see it until after that one reflection, I didn't see it until I got closer to him and could see him personally.
Yeah, it's scary.
So you make a good point.
It's scary. And the only reason I bring it up is because I've had close calls and people were wearing reflective gear. I can see, like in rainy conditions especially, there's just so much light and glare and stuff that you have to watch out for it. And then the other thing we got to watch out for is ice, right?
Sometimes black ice, you can't even tell that there's actually ice on the ground, and you could slip on it without even knowing. So being careful of, the weather conditions. If it's icy, I've seen people run with cleats on their shoes, but if you don't have them and you have just regular running sneakers, it might not be the safest thing for you to do. And then snow piles. A lot of times in my area, snow piles are on the side of the road, and or there's drifts in the road. I know I like on a nice snowy day that, if it snowed overnight to go for a run in the morning, I don't mind running in the snow as long as my path is clear. But you do need to be careful of cars. Sometimes a car has to go a different way than they normally would to avoid a snow pile or something that's on the road that wouldn't normally be there.
I think when it gets that bad that I have to deal with ice, I just don't run. I just found that for me, it wasn't worth the risk, but certainly you have to be more aware. What's another tip you have for us?
One good thing to do is to find a running buddy. It's really hard to motivate yourself 24/7 to do everything that you really should do, but finding a running buddy makes it a lot easier because that person is going to be there at whatever time it is that you're meeting. And so you don't want to let that person down. And it just makes it so much easier and more enjoyable when you're running.
I think the hardest part for me in the wintertime is not the running in the cold, but it's dragging my butt out of bed on a cold Saturday morning when it's 25, 30 degrees outside Fahrenheit and I just want to sleep in. Like, I love that comfort feeling of being warm. And if it wasn't for the fact that I run with people on Saturdays, I wouldn't get up. I love running and I really enjoy being around people when I run, but there's mornings where it's like, I could just sleep in. Like, it's too cold outside to get out of bed. So anybody who can do that and having that accountability of somebody, I think is just, it's hard enough when the weather's nice sometimes. You just don't feel like, sometimes we just don't feel like running. And it's a mental battle. And I think having that accountability partner is everything. Definitely agree with that one. I think that's important, especially in the wintertime.
Yeah, I typically run at about 5 a.m.-ish a couple days a week. And if my running partner wasn't there, I would have quit on myself 100 times. And she says the same thing about, she has to drive to my house because my neighborhood is more lit than hers. So it's even harder for her because she has to get out of bed a little bit earlier and drive a little further. But we definitely would not have done all the stuff that we've done if it wasn't for each other. Like, I've even heard of people doing it over the phone, which is really fun.
There's some groups, I don't do it anymore, but there used to be a group that was to yourself by getting up early and there's exercising and meditation and self-development. And it's a time 2 hours while everybody else is asleep. You take care and you do your stuff. And I used to have this morning routine thing and it didn't last very long. I mean, if I'm being honest, my most alive and awake time is in the evenings. I prefer to do things in the evenings. I'm not a morning person, and I know that's an excuse because you can change that. But when I was reading his book, and then they have a Facebook group that's part of that. And it's interesting that people would get on and look for accountability partners, and they'd be in other parts of the world, and they would do the same thing. They would get up and call each other and make sure that the other person woke up at 4:30 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning so that they would make sure that the other person was up. And then once they made sure everything was up, then they went on about their day. When I did that, I found that I was more reliable. I always took care of things that made my life better. It was always when I would write the best blog post or when I would be more consistent, I guess, at writing the blog post. I'm not as consistent as I am with the podcast, but I found that if I did things in the morning, if I exercised in the morning, I'd be less tired than when I come home at the end of the day and I'm stressed out and I'm tired and I'm just not mentally in it. I'm not as creative. I couldn't think of, the right words to write or the right things to say. Having that accountability person doesn't have to be somebody you run with. It has to be somebody that can just validate that you're there. And you can find somebody even in a different state because technology now is great, right? You can get on a phone call and have somebody just having a conversation with you as you're working out and running. So that's a great idea. And we probably working out and running. So that's a great idea. And that'd probably be a cool thing we could even do as a group is just pick different times and have people just kind of hold people self accountable. And I'm not promising anything, but that would be kind of cool, right? We all get on a group call.
Anybody wants to work out at 5 a.m., I'm there.
Yeah, not me. I'll work out at 5 p.m., but Yeah, so that whole miracle morning thing kind of was a thing that was a phase I went through. I'd love to get back into it, but I can get up early on Saturday mornings on a weekend, one time a week, to go run my long run with people or to run with people. But when it's by myself, I just find I'm more consistent when I do something after work, or when I used to work from home. I don't work from home anymore, but when I work from home, I'd take a 2-hour lunch and I would go work out and then, take my shower afterwards and then spend the afternoon working. But I found, at least with me, I don't need the accountability in the afternoons and evenings, but I definitely need it in the morning, and I definitely need it on those really cold days where I just don't feel like getting out of bed. Okay, so we've talked about layers, we talked about being safe, we talked about the different safety gear, we talked about running, finding a running buddy, we talked a little bit about racing and throwing off layers and different stuff like that. We talked about the Pinterest graphic that you had that kind of gave guidance on the types of clothing versus the different temperatures. Any other things that you can think of from running in cold weather? Any other tips that we have not mentioned?
I think one of the most important things that you should remember is we as runners should always warm up, do dynamic warm-up exercises before our run. But we often, if we admit it to ourselves, blow that off or only do it halfway. And I think one of the things to remember the most about running in the cold is that your body is cold. And then if you don't warm up your muscles, then you will give yourself a greater chance of injury. So it's very important to remember to warm yourself up, do some good stretching. Sometimes I do my warm up in 2 segments. I do one warm up in the house where I'm warm. And then I go outside and warm up a little bit outside, but I don't do it as much outside so that, I need to get myself acclimated to the cold, but I also need to just stretch my muscles.
I agree. I think even when it's not cold outside, runners in general, myself included in this group, tend to not do the dynamic warm-ups and stretches. And what we mean by that is not the static stretching that you learned, like, bend over, touch your toes, or pull your leg up and do quad stretches, but more dynamic where you're moving the muscles in their natural way of moving. So things like doing a lunge or doing side steps or doing high knees or jumping jacks and things that are causing the muscle to truly warm up, and our muscles get cold. And it was interesting just following the Marine Corps marathon this past weekend that it was cool and rainy and cold and people were wet, and there was a lot of people complaining that they had injuries or had struggles. And I have seen that in times in the past where I would go out and it would just be a short 3-mile run, and I'd get it, and I didn't warm up. I thought, I'll just use the first. We always do this, right? We're just going to use the first mile to warm up. We'll go easy on the first mile. And the reality is we don't. Or if we do, it's still not a really good warm up. We're not engaging all the muscles. We're just engaging a few of the muscles. And so I definitely agree that we need to make sure that, especially in the cold, everything tightens up. Everything's, more likely to have a strain and overdo something. So having that warm up, I think, is important all the time, but even more so. Plus, I think it just helps you. You know how we always say the first mile lies? Like we always, every time you go out for a run, in the first mile or two, you just spend that time and you just don't feel like you feel tight. You don't feel like you're into the run. And we always say the first mile or two is just, that's kind of our warm up, and the first mile just kind of sucks in general. It's because we haven't warmed up, right? It's like we're just going up. Once we're warmed up after that mile or two, then our running feels good. So it'd be really cool if we did proper warm up to be able to go out and enjoy that first mile or two. Because some of us are only going out and running 3 or 4 miles. So you're spending half your run just warming up, and you're only enjoying the last half of your run. It'd be kind of nice to have that warm up and enjoy more of the run, I guess. But it's a time thing. I get it. People, we try to cram as much as we can in our busy days. And we often think, I'll just warm up on that first mile. Any other things that you can think of that we have not talked about? I'm trying to think of any discusses on the Facebook page with their tips or the Facebook group.
I can't think of anything else.
Okay, so let's do a quick review. I can't think of anything else in the minute. I know as soon as I stop recording, I'll think about 5 things, but that's how it always is. All right, so we talked about layers. We talked about being safe. The only thing I'll add with the be safe that we didn't really talk about is it is getting dark, right? And some things can happen in the dark. You never know. You just need to be aware of your surroundings in addition to just the cars and the ice. Certainly have your head on a swivel at all times. If you don't feel safe running in your area, then take those runs indoors. But we also talked about safety gear. We talked about Knox gear, and I do have a review on the RunBuzz website and kind of get into how I use the gear and the different equipment I use. I, by the way, did not come up with it. I came up with it from many, many people in the community just raving about it. And after having seen several runners running it, I was sold on it. Then we talked about finding a running buddy, somebody that can make running easier. We talked about racing in the cold, what to wear, and then, of course, warming up. So it's always a good reminder. We're heading into that season, and I think a lot of us that have been running for a while, we do some of these. One last thing that I can think of, and then I'll give you one last chance, Sean, if you got anything else that you haven't covered. Your cell phone. So I had and I think I brought it up on the podcast last time, about a year or two back, last time we did a cold weather episode. I took my dog out back when he was younger, and we went for a run, and we were running through my neighborhood. It was one episode. I took my dog out back when he was younger, and we went for a run, and we were running through my neighborhood. It was one of those beautiful, like, light snow, like maybe only a half inch of snow, but everything was covered in snow, and it was so peaceful and quiet. Took the dog out, got all the way on the other side of the neighborhood, about 2 miles from my house, and he got snow or ice built up in his paws, and his paws started freezing, and totally unexpected, and he just laid down. He would not move. And he's a 100-pound, 110-pound golden retriever. I'm 2 miles away from home. It's 10 o'clock at night. He's not moving. And I go to pull out my cell phone, and it's completely frozen, shut off, locked up, couldn't do anything. Couldn't get the thing started. So now I'm away from home. I can't even call my wife to come pick me up. And so I took my phone, stuck it up under my shirt, up under my arm, tried to heat it up. Did that for a couple minutes, got the thing to where it fired up, and then it died again. I was like, you got to be kidding me. I'm like, I'm not carrying this dog home. And I got to the point where I put it back up under my arm, made the second call. I was able to get through long enough that I was able to get a hold of my wife, although I couldn't explain where I was, but at least I was able to get a hold of her. And then I did it a third time and eventually told her where I was. So if you're going to be out running at night, and you're going to be running out in the cold, you may want to put that phone someplace where it's going to stay warm up against your body, so that the body heat keeps the phone warm. That was a complete shocker. That's something I'd never experienced before. And now that it's happened once, it seems like every time I run in the cold, my iPhone just shuts down.
That's happened to me before too. The other thing that I did think of were racing or running a long run in the cold. It's good to keep water on you, like a water bottle in your hand where it would stay warmer. Because the one race that I did do that was 25 degrees, by the time I got to the last water stop, the water was so icy that it was terrible going down my throat with the chunks of ice. So if you kept a water bottle in your hand or maybe up against your waistband, it would keep the water warmer and it might not freeze as easily.
I actually thought of 2 more since you just brought that up. So one is if you're somebody who uses gels, when the gels get cold, they get really thick and hard to swallow. And what I found is if you put them in the palm of your hand and kind of just knead and squeeze the gels and use the heat coming off your hand to warm up the gels get a lot more, not liquidy, but the thickness of them gets less. And so it's easier to swallow if you're doing fueling on long runs. And then the other thing is if you go in the spring, these hand warmers, like the ones you crush and they heat up, carrying a couple of those with you and keeping them in your pockets so that you can put your hands in. Sometimes with my hands and my feet, any of the extremities really, they tend to get frostbite before maybe your core does. And so I found that if I take gloves, I can sometimes create those little hand warmers and slide them up under my glove. They'll stay toasty for a good 15, 20 minutes, sometimes even longer. And just having a couple of those, and you can get them really dirt cheap, especially if you have stores like, because February, March comes around and winter's over, they will just bulk sell that stuff. You can get cases of it for pennies on the dollar, and they last forever. It's just nice having that little heat source, and I've used those from time to time on the really cold days. Or, if you need to heat that stupid cell phone up really quick, you just wrap your cell phone in those. But those were two things that popped up when you mentioned the water.
That reminds me of a funny story. I buy them often when I'm doing races because I have Raynaud syndrome, which is where my fingers and my toes get really cold and numb, and especially in the winter. So I buy them and I put them in my gloves. Like you said, I slide them inside my gloves, but I slid them inside the side of my shoe right before a race last year. And I forgot to take them out before I started running. And that was a bit uncomfortable. So I had to stop and pull them out, right in the midst of the start of the race where everybody's rushing out of the starting gate. And then along the way, I would get warm. So I started handing off my glove ones to people that were standing on the side of the road to keep them warm. Because, all those wonderful spectators that come and cheer you on, they have to be cold.
Absolutely. So. Well, Sean, I think these are great tips. And I want to thank you for putting together this list and sharing that with us, and definitely get this put into a post with different show notes, the different tips, so people can go out there and just get a nice with us, and definitely get this put into a post with different show notes, the different tips, so people can go out there and just get a nice checklist of all of them, as well as some links to some of the resources we mentioned on the show. And definitely that Pinterest graphic, or at least the link to Pinterest. So for those of you on Pinterest, you can pin it. If not, you can at least take a look at the graphic and give you, it's kind of a nice guide. I think I've seen the graph. I think you might have posted it before in the past.
I probably have, yeah.
I've seen it in the group at least once, but I think bringing it back out is good, especially for, like I said, most of us are heading into that cold part of the season. Now, the people up in Minnesota and Montana, they're laughing at us because they have a whole new category of cold. They're laughing like,
yeah,
these
I can't say
20s, that's like a summer day for them. But, for us in the kind of the Midwest, or even on the East Coast where you're at, you're kind of the same, I don't know, latitude, longitude, whatever it is. You guys have a lot of the same weather climate that we do. So, but, for those of you that live in, Arizona, and we don't feel sorry for you. You get perfect weather, except when it gets in the 120 degrees in the summertime. So their summer is our winter, and our winter is their summer. But, and then obviously people listening from Australia, we're going into winter and they're going into their summer. So it still boggles my mind that the other side of the world is completely opposite in us, because it seems like a smaller world than it is. But anyways, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing these tips, and we'll definitely get these out on the show notes page, and contact with Sean either directly through runbuzz.com through the contact form, or over in Facebook. Just do a search for RunBuzz, and like the page, and then join the group. And then once in the group, you're active in the group. So, all right. So thanks so much for joining me tonight, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me tonight.
You bet.